where were some of the cool places you traveled to do your research on this?
Yeah, these depositions, which form kind of the main basis of the book, are at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. They Joseph Rao, the attorney, his papers got donated there after he died, and so they were there. So that's where I went. There are a few other people's papers who were at the Library of Congress. The National Archives, they have a lot of government records. So I've been there a lot for either my dissertation or my first book or this book. So I spent a lot of time there. I've gotten records from UCLA, where Jolly West was, from Georgetown University has paper, Williams Donovan's papers are there. The Army Heritage, I forget what it's called, the Army Medical Heritage Association, it's something like that or whatever. I got records from there. I don't know, there's a lot of places.
How long did it take to put this together, this book?
I probably started working on these two books because I kind of started working on them at the same time because I initially thought it was going to be one book. So I'd say I started in 2018.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, wow.
And the first one came out in 2023. This one's 2025.
Wow.
So, I finished grad school in 2019. So I kind of finished my dissertation for the most part, and I still had a year. I was still doing research and kind of putting the final touches on my dissertation, but I thought, I got some free time. I'm going to go ahead and start writing this book. So I was kind of double dipping. My department, the Department of History at UT, they would, I might get a grant or something to go to visit an archive. And I would say, yeah, I'm going to research for my dissertation. But on the side, while I'm there, I did research for these books. So that helped.
Yeah, it's cool how they translate it right into each other too, like kind of seamlessly as well, even from a timeline perspective. But did you, we've been talking about all these different things they do, the 149 subcategories of MKUltra that you found out. And a lot of it has to do with things that were here, whether it be in prisons or, the Operation Midnight Climax, or even putting LSD in the punch bowl at, the CIA party. Did we do any of this internationally though too?
Yeah.
What did that look
The
like?
international part of MKUltra was called MK Delta.
Oh,
And
that's a nice name. I like that.
Yeah, there are a lot of these MK, MH. So in fact, MKUltra after 1963 became MK Search, and it was MKUltra but continued for a few years. So there are a lot of kind of cryptonyms that are used. We don't know too much about the international uses of these drugs. The Church Committee talks about several administrations that happened as part of interrogations of prisoners. We don't know too much about them. As part of that Artichoke program that was a little bit before MKUltra.
Which one was that again?
That's kind of the precursor to MKUltra. They're basically doing interrogations with drugs.
Okay. Standard.
There is some descriptions of the interrogations that happen. There are 2 spies that are caught, and they're given, I think it's sodium amytal or something like that. And it describes kind of, it actually says that they revealed a lot of information that these people probably shouldn't have. And they start using some of these substances. And one of the quotes from the officers who's doing this is that this is like the drugs that's going to open our minds. This is going to allow us to do everything we want to. So they see the, LSD and sodium amytal and all this stuff. This is like the greatest thing in the world because it's going to allow them to get the truth from anyone they want to. So the interrogations actually seem to be pretty useful or pretty positive. They're able to get a lot of information. As far as the international side, though, those happen internationally, which is why I mentioned them. Sidney Gottlieb, the main thing internationally he does is there is an attempt to discredit one of the people who's running to become president of the Philippines. And not too much is known about this, but and you kind of have to triangulate that it was actually the Philippines, but I think that's where it was that this was happening. But there was an attempt to put some LSD into the water of one of these political people who was sympathetic to the Soviets, to the communists, in order to, like I mentioned with Castro, in order to make them seem crazy right before a political rally.
Right.
So that whenever they started talking, they would seem crazy. So that's the one kind of international use of this I can think of, except besides those interrogations, several interrogations.
But there could have been other stuff. We just don't have a record of it.
Yes. So Stephen Kinzer wrote a biography of Sidney Gottlieb called Poisoner in Chief.
Yes.
And in
excellent.
there, he talks about this place called Camp King in Germany. And it's this camp where interrogations occurred. And he says that this was kind of part of MKUltra. They were using drugs to basically torture these people. They were doing all kinds of stuff to these, I don't know, prisoners or whatever they were. I think that kind of thing happened. There were interrogations that happened at Camp King, but again, I've never seen any link to MKUltra, so I don't really talk about it that much in this book because it's not that it didn't happen, is that it doesn't really have, to me, it doesn't really have much to do with MKUltra. So I'm telling the story of MKUltra here. I don't really see a connection. So, I don't talk too much about that in this book because of that. But he thinks that there is this international connection with that, these interrogations that are happening at these prisons, like in Germany, Camp King.
Yeah, whenever I hear something like, yeah, we ended that, it's like, yeah, maybe there was something else spun off or whatever. But we've been alluding to like kind of how this blew up all day. You've mentioned, Gottlieb destroyed files in 1973. Later there were depositions, and obviously the church commissions in the middle of that in 75, 76. But what was the initial? Was it the Family Jewels document that blew it on this?
Yeah, that pretty much that's the main thing. The Family Jewels gets leaked to Seymour Hersh. He publishes part of it in the New York Times, not even about MKUltra, but about how the CIA had tried to infiltrate some groups that were protesting the Vietnam War.
Right.
So that became big news.
Can't have that.
Yeah. And so there were several of these kinds of stories, and the Family Jewels had partially gotten leaked. And Gerald Ford and his administration is very worried that the rest of that's going to get leaked. And so they set up, which includes like assassination attempts on foreign leaders. Sidney Gottlieb is involved in multiple. He sends anthrax to the Congo to try to kill this guy named Patrice Lumumba, the prime
we
minister.
did a podcast on it.
Oh, did you? Oh, great,
yeah.
great.
Yeah. Stuart Reed, that's his last name, right?
Yeah, you got it.
That was episode 165, I think.
Nice. And good memory with the numbers on that, too.
Yeah,
That's great.
he wrote a whole book called the Lumba Plot, which is
I've
excellent.
used that for this book. That was helpful.
Yeah, that's cool. So that was in the bibliography. That's a case that's just totally ignored in history. It was a proxy war between the intelligence of KGB and the intelligence of CIA, and there's Gottlieb right in the middle.
Yep. And one thing, I don't know if he includes this in this book because I think it only comes out in the depositions that I found. In fact, in his book, I think he says that the substance that was used to try to kill Lumumba was, I don't remember what it was, some substance, but I think that was wrong. I think it's actually anthrax, because in these depositions, Gottlieb reveals for the first time how he tried to do it with anthrax that he got from Fort Detrick, where that Special Operations Division was. And yeah, so anthrax was the thing. That was kind of an exciting thing to find in the depositions.
Yeah,
but I mentioned
exciting.
yeah. For me as a historian, maybe not for Lumumba. The idea was to put some of this, or at least some kind of substance, in his toothpaste that he would brush his teeth with, and it would kill him. And the joke about Lumumba was that he never brushed his teeth because he feared an assassination attempt. So the joke was that he preferred bad breath to no breath at all. Oh. Yeah.
That's a bar.
I mentioned Lumumba because we were talking about how this eventually came out with the church committee and all that. So there was these assassination attempts that the Ford administration did not want to get out to the public, the idea that the CIA could possibly be involved in this kind of thing. And so Ford sets up a commission, the Rockefeller Commission, the vice president, Nelson Rockefeller. And the commission is supposed to investigate abuses by the intelligence community of the past. Really, one of the main things they're doing is, we'll reveal some stuff that we want you to know, but we want to make sure that nobody else investigates like this other stuff.
Rockefeller would never cover anything. Okay, let's just put that out.
So we
want
to make it look like we're really investigating and getting everything out in the open. But the purpose is to make sure that Congress doesn't launch their own investigation, because if the executive branch, if we launch an investigation, we can say that we're going to release this stuff, and it might dissuade Congress from launching a joint investigation or a simultaneous investigation, and they could reveal stuff that the executive doesn't want to get out there. Right. It turns out that the executive branch, or the Congress, launches its own investigation anyway. The Church Committee and the Pike Committee in the House. Church Committee's in the Senate, Pike Committee's in the House. And
what was the Pike? I don't know much about that.
It was kind of analogous to the Church Committee. It was more, instead of focusing on the specific abuses that happened in the past, a lot of what it did is focused on the culture of the CIA that enabled these things, and that led to a lot of intelligence failures. So the CIA failed to predict a lot of things. The Tet Offensive and the first nuclear tests of certain countries and everything.
Failed to predict it, or had a little hand in making sure it happened?
Well, Pike is saying, the Pike Committee says they failed to predict this stuff. And what allowed, or what enabled the CIA to miss this stuff? How did that happen? They offer a lot of critiques of it, Right. So that's what the Pike Committee mostly was doing. So these committees come out, these congressional committees, and they're investigating these past abuses, and they have an incentive to find a lot of dirt because it's got people on them like Ronald Reagan, and they want to make their names. Church wants to make his name because he wants to run for president. And I think Reagan was actually on the Rockefeller Commission. I think I messed that up, sorry. But Church was, they want to make a name for themselves, so they want to get some sensational headlines that they can use. And so they start investigating not only the stuff about the Vietnam War dissidents who are protesting, but they realize the Family Jewels, includes a lot more things, the potential assassination, plots. It's ironic. Gerald Ford sets up this Rockefeller Commission because he wants to prevent this concept of assassinations, the idea that the CIA might be involved in that, from entering into the public.
Streisand
But
effect.
ironically, he's the one that lets it slip, because it was at that meeting with the New York Times editors that he said, I mentioned earlier, he said something to the effect of, what other skeletons are in our closets? Assassination, stuff like that. That's off the record. So he lets it slip. And so it's because Daniel Shore is the CBS News correspondent that eventually gets to. Shore runs a story about this, and now the Rockefeller Commission has no choice but to investigate it, because it would how could you possibly investigate abuses and not that? And so he kind of forces their hand, even though that was the very thing he tried to prevent from happening.
That's crazy. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.